Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to UV unwrap a model. We'll be using a simple sword as our example, then I'll explain how to place each seam marking, then finally we'll apply a colorful grid texture for testing and cover some UV adjustment. But before we go into the first step, there is some requirements. So UV mapping is only supported on mesh objects. If your object is a curved text or something else, you will need to convert it to a mesh object first. Also, UV mapping is much easier when your mesh has good topology. While you can still unwrap a mesh with poor topology, it often leads to issues like stretching and pinching, making the process more difficult and time-consuming. There is something you should know before using this UV mapping method. This technique is designed for models that will have detailed textures, typically with medium to high precision. If you are working on a low poly model with minimal detail, I recommend using the Smart UV project instead, as it's much more efficient in terms of time. With that out of the way, let's dive in. Before I perform mark seam, there is some overlay I want to hide. Now, let's go to edit mode first to see why. As you can see, my mesh edges are highlighted in pink. You might be wondering, what does this mean? The pink color indicates an edge crease, which is typically added during mesh modeling. Since we are about to do UV mapping, we don't need this to be displayed. To hide them, go to the mesh edit overlay panel. Over here, you'll see all of the edge overlays. Now, this is optional thing to do, but very helpful if you do it. So, I'd like to disable everything except the seams, because everything except the seams are usually only relevant for mesh modeling. Don't worry, you will not break anything if you enable it again later. Alright, let's get into the first step, marking seams. Okay, to mark seam and edge, we need to enter edit mode and switch to edge selection mode. Why? Because mark seams operation is easier to access through the mesh edge. Now, for the initial seam placement, it depends on your mesh shape. If you're unsure where to start, I recommend marking seam along the halves of the mesh, as this is a solid starting point. Why is this solid starting point? We'll get to that soon. For now, let's do marking seam along halves of the mesh. To do that, we can just loop select edge by holding Alt key and then press left click to one of the edge. But be careful, there might be parts that don't get selected, like this section here. To extend the existing selection and also edge loop selection, hold Alt for the edge loop selection, then hold Shift to extend the existing selection, then left click to the edge. Okay, if you select something by a mistake, you can just deselect it. For deselecting an edge loop is you just need to do the same holding Alt plus Shift key and left click to that edge. For one of the edge is you only hold the Shift key and left click to that edge. Now, whenever I selected multiple things, I double check my selection by switching to wireframe mode. To enter wireframe mode, press the Z key. This will open the shading menu. Then you can just click the wireframe option or simply press the 4 key to toggle it directly. In this mode, I can clearly see through the mesh, making it easier to verify everything what I selected. If you can't see through your mesh, click this button to activate it. If you're done with the edge selection, let's perform the mark seam to these edges. To perform it, make sure you are in the edge mode. Then press right click, then choose the mark seam. You will immediately see a red line appear along the edges you selected, indicating that you've successfully marked those edges as seams. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. If you mark seaming the wrong edge, you can simply select them, then right click and then choose clear seam. Okay, so there is a lot of way we can marking seams, like why we don't put the mark seams here, or there, or etc. Why do we start marking seams down the middle of the mesh? Okay, let's break it down about the mark seam and answer that question. So, when you mark seams, it's like setting boundaries on the mesh that tell Blender where to unwrap it. Doing that, you are defining where to separate and flatten the mesh for 2D mapping. We can also say that a well-placed seam reveals the internal volume of the mesh, but the exposed volume should be settled and subtle, ensuring the mesh can be unfolded correctly into a 2D map space. That is the answer and the explanation about mark seam. While the result is not that perfect, this is still a solid starting point for your UV map. Alright, we're done with marking seams along halves of the mesh. But if your mesh geometry still appears complex after marking seams along the halves, like in my case where the mesh can still be separated into distinct parts and easy to identify, you will need to add more seams. For example, if I separate my sword into parts, they would be the blade, guard, handle, and handleback. Alright, let me speed run this marking seam for you. Okay, now I will explain to you why we do this. Oh, and also I'm going to show the UV map just to make the explanation easier to visualize. We'll actually create the UV map in the next step, so you don't have to follow anything in this part. Okay, so the reason why we do this, if my sword only had the UV island for front and back part, Blender might struggle to preserve all of the details on smaller mesh parts, like this part for example. When we zoom in, the details become clearer, but in the normal view, they may appear pixelated or blurry. Since the final result based on normal view, giving smaller parts their own UV islands ensures the texture stays sharp and detailed. For more details about this, we'll get to that part soon. Now that you've done with the mark seam, we're ready to perform the UV unwrap. First, we need to switch to the UV editing tab up here. This tab is used to see the UV map. Once you're in the UV editing tab, don't worry about the left side window for now. Let's just focus on the right side window. To check if your model has UV map data, go to the Object Data Properties panel over here. Then you will see the UV map section here. As you can see, it's empty for now, so let's perform the UV unwrap. So select your entire mesh or press the A key as a shortcut, and while you could use the UV tab right here, I'll just show you the shortcut. So the shortcut is, first make sure your mouse is positioned over the right side window where your mesh is displayed. While your mesh is selected, press the U key and choose unwrap. After that, select angle based. Now if you check the Object Data Properties panel, you will see the UV map section is no longer empty, indicating you successfully make a UV map data. Down here, you can adjust the UV map margin by adjusting this value. If you somewhat don't see anything in the left side window, make sure you select all of your mesh first, or on the top left, enable this UV sync selection function button. The next thing we need to do is optimization. Let's take a look at the left side window, which is the area where we manage U-dimensional space, or UDIM for short. Now you might be wondering, what's wrong with this UDIM? Doesn't it look fine? Well, there is still a lot of empty space here, and that's wasted space. When you waste UDIM space, it makes your texture resolution less efficient. Like in this example, between the small and big UV island, highlighting the significant difference between pixelation and smoothness. There are cases where you might want to leave some empty space, but that's more advanced topic beyond the scope of this tutorial. So now, let's focus on the basics. That is, make better use of the empty UDIM space to maximize our texture memory. To do that, we can resize all of our UV islands to fill all the empty space. Luckily, there is an automatic function for this. That function name is Pack Islands. To perform it, select the UV island you want to perform. Yep, that's right, you can choose one UV island to perform. But in this case, we want all of the UV island, so I will select all of my UV island. Then go to UV tab up here and click the Pack Island option. We'll see this settings menu. In this case, these default settings are good enough, so we can just press the Pack button. Your selected UV island scale should be changed. All of your selected UV island will change based on how their scale ratio previously, and maximize their scale to fit the UDIM space as much as possible. At this point, if you don't see any large empty space, it likely means you have the most optimized UDIM possible. So feel free to either skip ahead or watch until the next step. Okay, so I want to reduce UV seam in my handle part mesh. This is because one island is better for texture result rather than two in my case, since there will be less texture seam visible if I want to paint details over the texture. Alright, let's do that. Let me isolate my handle part mesh first. So, my simple logic is that if there is a hole in both the front and back parts of the mesh, then it's possible to have just one UV edge seam for the halves. Now, let's unwrap only the handle part again to reset the UV island. And then perform the back island again. Now from here, we got a new problem. That is this UV island scale is accurate to their 3D mesh scale? I mean, look at this handle part and blade part. How come my handle UV island is bigger than my blade UV island? In this example, the ratio between the UV island and its corresponding 3D mesh part is too unbalanced, so this pixelation happened. To fix this problem, we can use an automatic function again. Okay, so first, select the UV island we want to perform. Again, in this case, I will just select all of my UV island. Then go to the UV tab up here and select average island scale. There you go. All of your UV island scale should have much better scale ratio. And now we can just perform the back island again. Now this is the best possible UV map I can achieve. Okay, you might be wondering, and also some of you might have the same situation as me. Why is my blade UV island or some of my island looks like this? It looks like much bigger than the other island. Well, this is because the average island scale between my blade and other part are exactly this scale ratio. For this kind of problem, there is two options you can do. For the first option, you can manually scale up the smaller parts or scale down the bigger parts. After that, pack all of your islands. But be careful, as I mentioned earlier, if your UV island are too small, it can lead to noticeable pixelation or reduced quality. The second option is to split the UV island in half. However, if you mark the seam in a frequently visible area, this could lead to quality issues, as I demonstrated earlier, especially if you're planning to use high detail texture with manual painting. However, if visible seams aren't a concern for you, or if you don't plan to do manual painting, this is definitely a better option than the first one. Alright, we're now at the final step, testing with a colorful grid texture. As you can see, we have the best UV settings, at least based on our current understanding, but we still need to test them. We will test it on our duplicated mesh. So select your mesh on object mode and then press Shift D and press Escape to place it. Name your duplicated mesh anything, I'm just going with sword test. And then make a material for our colorful grid texture. Name it anything you want, then remove everything except the material we just made. Now we just need to apply the texture. Make sure you select your duplicated mesh on object mode, then we can go to the shading tab right here. On shading window, make sure you select the material you just made. Then we are going to add a image texture node. On the shading tab, click this add drop down, then choose texture, then image texture. This node is where we apply any texture, including built-in Blender texture into our material. We can just click new button here and name anything you want. You can enable or disable alpha, it does not matter in this case. Then you have to change the genre type into color grid or UV grid. It's up to you. Personally, I like colorful grid texture. Then you click the new image and then connect the color port into the base color port. Now we can go back into layout tab. If you don't see any texture displayed, change your shading mode into material preview. Now we just need to find any stretching part. If you found stretching part like this or anything similar, that means this stretching part is still complex for Blender to UV map. That means it needs more mark seam or better mark seam placement. We can just use the same method previously, that is, mark seam along the halves or separate it into distinct part, but only focus on this part of mesh. In my case, it's only on the guard part. Then we do the UV map again. Why not all of your mesh, you ask? Well, if I select the entire mesh, it will reset the UV map based on your seam markings, not your manual UV island placement. So let's just UV unwrap only on this part. We can just select it from the UV map. After that, you will see this UV island overlap. That is okay, we can just perform the average island scale function for all of the mesh and then perform the pack islands. There you go, the previous UV island is not changed, only the guard part is changed. Since I don't manually separate UV islands and always use MarkSim to do so, the result of unwrapping the entire mesh shouldn't be drastically different. So I highly recommend using MarkSims if you are planning to separate UV islands. There you go, we managed to fix the stretching problem. Let's try the MarkSim along the halves method. Yep, it still works fine. Now you just need to do the same on your original mesh. I have done that in off-screen, so this is already finished. That's it, now you have a fully prepared model for texturing and baking. Congratulations! Hopefully this video helped you get the hang of UV mapping basics, or at least teaches you something new. Cheers!